Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. My name's Jacob, and today we're taking a look at the bootleg, aka knockoff, MonsterArts King Ghidorah Special Color version. Now, of course, what that means is this is not an official product. This is one that you find off of some of those slightly more dodgy sites like AliExpress and probably Wish.com and stuff like that. I've seen these on eBay as well and all that sort of stuff. But basically, you get these direct from China, and they're very cheap for a figure like this. Like, okay, still pretty expensive, but for a MonsterArts, it's on the cheaper end, especially considering that the real deal of these, King Ghidorah Special Color version figures, or even just the standard ones, they go for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So when this one showed up, and it looked half decent in the promo photos, it's really tempting, and I just wanted to basically show you guys this thing so you guys know what to expect if you are looking for an affordable, MonsterArts type King Ghidorah articulated figure. Yeah, let's get right into it. So let's just get rid of these little prop buildings for the moment and talk about this figure. So, the first thing you would notice if you did watch my unboxing of this guy is that I actually managed to put him together. In my unboxing, I wasn't able to attach his tails or one of his heads yet because, the ball joints are having trouble going in and all that sort of stuff. However, I was actually able to get them in relatively easily with just using a blow dryer on the socket and then putting in that little barbell ball joint in there after the plastic was softened, and now it's, in there really well, and there's no chance this is just going to pop out randomly. If you've seen my unboxing, you know this is no ordinary recast or bootleg, because the first thing that just is what really makes this figure stand out is that this is not an exact recast of the original version of the special color version of King Ghidorah that we got. This actually has a lot of new sculpted pieces. In fact, the bulk of this figure is actually a completely different body, legs, tails, and necks, which I strongly believe is of some sort of unreleased Showa MonsterArts King Ghidorah figure, because I just can't fathom where else they would have, got all these pieces from, because I hardly doubt some sort of bootleg company went to all the effort to make the sculpting and the molds themselves, especially to this quality, because despite this thing being a bootleg, it is actually of a fairly high quality. And now I'll zoom in a little later in this review to give you guys a really good look at the sculpt. But for now, I'll just say, the sculpt is just as good on this thing, pretty much, as you'd expect from an actual MonsterArts. There's no real, nothing that completely is very jarring or anything like that. And articulation-wise too, it is pretty good. It's I'd say the ball joints are slightly more liable to popping off than your average MonsterArts figure, but not by much at all, especially for a Ghidorah figure, because I do have the original release King Ghidorah, and that figure, it pops off all the time, joints off of it. So I don't think this one's much worse than that. So yeah, here's the original King Ghidorah. So the sculpt should look identical to this one, pretty much, aside from some tweaking to the joints in the wings. However, if you can, see, these sculpts aren't the same. Now it's a little tricky because they have two wide wings, so we can just pull off the wings on this Ghidorah, because if you see me on my unboxing, you know this guy arrived disassembled pretty much. So, first thing you'll notice, color-wise, this one is a much brighter gold. I think this is the same gold that they use on the special color version. from the the official MonsterArts version, because that one does have a much more vibrant gold. I really love the coloring on this bootleg figure. I actually prefer it a lot to the original version of King Ghidorah that I have here. Even the paintwork in general is actually pretty solid for this thing. Like later on, I'll show you guys a close-up of his face, of his mouths, and the paintwork in there. I think it's actually better than the one on this original version. Now, when this guy arrived, he did have some little issues, like his horns were a little bit bent, and like I said, I couldn't get this head on, and the tails wouldn't pop in. However, using a blow dryer softens the plastic up, and you can adjust the horns to be nice and perfectly straight. And I did that, and they're looking a lot better. Not perfect yet, but I didn't really put much effort into it. But they are looking a little bit better than they were when I first got them. I didn't even address that in that review because I already knew that I could fix that easily with a blow dryer, so it's not a big issue. But just something to note. So having a hair blow dryer is a big help with having, being a figure collector of any kind, really. But yeah, going into these two designs, first thing you'll notice is, of course, the wider chest and sort of the more bulky, longer legs that you'll see on this bootleg's figure sculpt. The original one has a slightly less bulky chest and slightly different shaped body, and the legs are completely different. The bootleg ones have much longer legs, whereas this one has sort of more stumpy legs. Also, the sculpt on the toenails on the bootleg one is it's not bad at all. I think I overemphasized how sort of lumpy it looked in the unboxing. They actually look pretty good, but especially when you look under his feet, you can tell it's a bootleg because it's just like flat, really, and it just says left and right. I don't know if you can see that there, but we'll look at it in a close-up later. But it's meant, the MonsterArts figures always have a sculpt under the feet, official ones for the most part, so that's a little way you can tell that this guy's a bootleg. So another interesting thing is, if you do actually look at photos of a Showa King Ghidorah, you will see that the shape of the body and the legs completely matches up with an actual 1964 King Ghidorah from the movie Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Same with the necks too. The difference with the necks is the Heisei Ghidorah has a sort of slightly rougher, more broader scaling under his necks, those little plates. They have a bit of texture on them, and they're a little wider. Whereas if you look at this new bootleg, these have much finer plates, and they're sort of more closely put together and thinner and smoother, which is very accurate to what we see in the Showa Ghidorah film. And they also start a little bit higher up on the neck, whereas these ones start almost right at the very bottom of the neck. So all this points to this one having the body of some sort of Showa King Ghidorah. Another thing I didn't really mention in my unboxing when I was comparing these two as well is look at the length of the Heisei Ghidorah's tail here. Very long tail. Then we get this new bootleg with the more Showa-like features, and he has a much shorter tail, almost like a quarter there. The very tips of the tail on this one, I think they are pretty much identical to the Heisei ones, and they do look really great on this tail. They might actually be they appear a tiny bit smaller, so I don't know, but sculpt wise they look almost identical. So I'm leaning towards these just being another thing that is from the Heisei films, because I'm pretty sure the original Showa Ghidorah had more of a brush-like tail, whereas this one is more of like a flat fan with these sort of spines, kind of like this one on the Heisei figure. Other differences you can see is just in the build of this new one's body. So again, I'll pull off his wings, which is another difference. The wings actually clip on, and they have these little joints that you can swivel in a couple of different ways to give them a bit of articulation, and they don't have those protective sort of little covers like you see on this figure. They have these little extra cover bits. Now, this isn't the special color version, my original one, so it doesn't have the better wing articulation, so the wings on this one are a bit fiddly and crappy when it comes to articulating them, but they should still look like this on the official, what's it called, special color version. But you can also see even the build of like where the tails join on the original Heisei Real version. This guy, the tails have, this is one solid little body piece here at the lower body, and it has two sockets for either tail to sort of sit in. And up the top where this upper torso locks in, it's got kind of like a curve right here where the joints align. However, on the new one, this bootleg one, this lower body piece is split into two sections, and that's where that little ball joint that I had trouble in was. And now I've put that in, and you can see them together. So there's one. So the body is made of three sections. There's the upper body with a much more straight cut along the back. Then there's this sort of middle body section, and then when the tail starts down here, it starts off, you know, together as one tail block, and then it splits up into two pieces. So it's built very differently to this one. And also the scaling all over it, though almost identical, is actually a little more finer on the special color version bootleg. This one has smaller scales, which also is indicative of the Showa King Ghidorah. So that is so cool. You can also see differences in like the spines on the back of his necks and stuff. This one has more like little flatter triangle type spines, as this, and the Heisei one has more sort of like claw-like sort of three-dimensional spines. The wings on these figures are basically identical. They've been I think they're the same molds we used. The detailing is probably a little bit better on the original one. However, the new recasts don't look shabby at all, especially with this coloring, because the gold they use is so vibrant and beautiful, and it really makes these wings look so majestic. But these definitely are the Heisei wings. The Showa Ghidorah had slightly different wings. You didn't have the scaling down near the base of the wings. So that is another little telltale sign of which which Ghidorah part is used where and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to take this guy out of the picture for a moment, and we're just going to kind of look at this figure as its own little figure for a second. You know, talk about his articulation and the build quality and all that sort of stuff. So articulation-wise, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, especially when I just got him out of the box or bubble wrap. He did have issues where, like I said, some of the joints didn't want to pop on, and some of the parts were very stiff. Because I felt as if when I was trying to move some joints, instead of the ball joints rolling around freely, the actual little barbell piece that has the ball joints was kind of bending, so that's not good. However, I did use the hot air blow dryer, and it helped a lot with some of these pieces. So, for example, this right leg here, at the pelvis, the joint here didn't want to move at all, pretty much. But after I, worked it a little bit, used the heat on it, look at that. Moves really, really well. So, he does have pretty good articulation, and if I didn't know this thing was a bootleg, I don't think I would be able to tell that it's a bootleg based upon the way the joints feel or the articulation. It's actually feels really, really convincing as an actual MonsterArts figure. This little ankle here has a tendency of popping off on mine really easily. Again, that's just a symptom of all MonsterArts figures. They tend to have ball joints that do stuff like that. This joint down here at the base of the tail, it kind of wriggles but doesn't really do very much articulation-wise, not a big deal. The tail itself, though, actually has really good articulation, and it holds its poses really well. So check out that. So it's a short tail, but look how beautifully it articulates. And you can just kind of get it into these all these sort of snake-like poses and do some really cool stuff. Some people are asking me could use this for stop motion, and I don't see why not. Like, this is probably going to be just as good as any other MonsterArts figure. Now, I think sometimes it flops down a little bit here and there and all that sort of stuff, but it's all pretty minor stuff. Now, it does have this sort of ball joint in the middle here, and this one is kind of loose, so he does tend to slouch down, slouch down, I mean, a little bit, but you can kind of prop him up like that, and he sometimes holds his pose, like, there we go. So that's pretty good. So I am happy with the leg articulation as well. Like I said, once I got those joints loosened up, because, you know, he's got very bulky legs, so he's not going to be doing much, but you can get him into all sorts of sort of interesting poses here, and can get really dynamic. So the quality of the articulation is actually really good, considering this is a bootleg. Like I said, sculpt and articulation wise, I wouldn't be able to tell that this is a bootleg aside from his feet not having texture under them. That's pretty much the only telltale sign. An issue with articulation is the mouths on this thing. They are really floppy, and, you know, sometimes they don't want to hold, and they're just a little bit awkward. However, that on its own isn't that, you know, surprising, because I have the same issue pretty much with the original version anyway. So this one, sometimes I guess these hold a little bit better, but the jaws tend to pop off on these ones a lot, and they can be really loose. So honestly, this one isn't much worse. The necks on this thing actually articulate really nicely. They have nice smooth articulation, and you can get them into pretty much any pose that you desire for a figure like this. Now, sometimes they will pop off, but that is to be expected with something with this much heavy articulation all the way through it. And generally the joints on these pop back on really easily, so it's not that big a deal. And yeah, like you can see there, that pops off, but you can put it straight back on. And paint-wise, this Ghidorah, you know, King Ghidorah tends not to have the most complicated paint jobs, let's be honest. Even though when I was reviewing the 2019 King Ghidorah figure, I did have a couple of issues with, like, the paintwork on that one, but that's because they painted it in, like, a sandy beige color. The thing about gold is, you don't really need to, you know, do very many highlights and variations in the paintwork, because with gold, it naturally creates its own really detailed highlights and really brings out the shapes and the contours of all the sculpted details. So you don't really need all of that sort of extra paintwork to really make it pop. Just the fact that it's metallic paint does that on its own. And the fact that they used this shade of gold is so nice, because I don't know if it's coming out on camera how good it looks, but I'm really loving this shade of gold, and I kind of wish that my original King Ghidorah here also had this shade of gold, because this one kind of looks more like a muddy sort of really not that vibrant sort of gold. And it, you know, very cool, very cool figure, this original one, but this one, you know, from a, you know, just really stands out on the shelf because of that really beautiful color. However, with the paintwork, it's actually kind of weird, because it has this beautiful vibrant color on the top. However, if you start to really bend these joints, and I don't know if you can see it on camera, but in the seam lines, so come on, I think there's a little bit of it there. There's like there's less of that vibrant gold, and there's like a more pale metallic color underneath, just under, you know, the articulation spots of all of these joints. And it's basically just a much more paler gold. It just looks like gold mixed with white paint, really. And it's very subtle, but it is there under the joints. It's almost as if, like, after they assembled the you know, these pieces, and they were already painted in this sort of more pale gold, they just went over the whole figure in like a more vibrant, deeper gold color. So that's kind of interesting and something to note about this bootleg. So whenever you kind of look under the ball joints into the crevices, that's the color that will be there, which is a bit strange, but not really an issue in my eyes. So yeah, most of this figure is this solid, vibrant gold. However, you know, the faces obviously have some painted details, and I actually like these a lot more. Like, if you can see the face there, he's got that nice sort of burgundy red for his tongue and his inner jaw, and his teeth are actually painted really cleanly. Look at that, really nice. The eyes are just okay, I'd say. I mean, for the size, I think they did a pretty good job. When you look at them really close up, like, yeah, they just kind of look like basically like a sort of beige dot with just like a line going through a thin black line going through the middle, and it's outlined in black. So, you know, the eyes are pretty good too. Not really complaining here. So, actually, I'd say that the paintwork on this thing is just as good as, if not better than my original one, which has really messy paint on the figure here. So I don't know how the actual special color version looks, but if you can see this one, he has like a transparent plastic for his lower jaw, so his tongue is a bit transparent, and yeah, his jaw's full off a lot, and his tongue and his teeth are painted in like a bright white color, but they're really messy, and I don't know if it's gonna come out on camera for you guys, and yeah. Yeah, but I don't know, the original one just doesn't look as clean, and the inner color of his mouth is not really as nice, I'd say, as the one that they used on this bootleg figure, which is really bizarre for me to say, honestly. Articulation wise, we can keep going. So the wings, you can get a lot of posing out of them because they do have these sort of joints. Now these joints don't look that great, unfortunately. They're not covered up. Honestly, they don't bother me too much because at least they hold the wings on and they function better than the ones in my previous figure. But you can get the wings to go up all the way like this, so it can be all folded up like a butterfly. You can move them down, and they should in theory swivel forward like this. So you can do some really weird things with the wings. Realistically, you only really want to just kind of flap them back and forth a little bit. And that is another thing to worry about, because these wings do tend to pop off sometimes. I mean, literally worst case scenario, you glue them on. Like, you can totally do that, and that would help. The thing is, if you don't touch them, there's no way they're just going to fall off, but if you're messing with it, then they are likely to slip off every once in a while. But it's actually still pretty decent. And these wings are, like I said, really nicely sculpted, and they're really light. Like, if you take them off and hold them, they feel super light, and they're super thin piece of plastic. They're probably about the same thickness as the original ones, maybe like a ½ mil thinner, or not. It's really hard to tell, but definitely a very light feeling wing. That's probably it for the articulation. Like I said, I would not be able to tell that this is a bootleg sculpt and articulation wise. I just want to give you guys kind of an idea what he looks like near my only other Showa King Ghidorah figure, which I own, which is this Bandai vinyl made in Japan from the 80s, which is a really cool figure, a bit of a rare one. But yeah, you can see this one's got the actual Showa sort of faces. He's a bit much more of a stylized figure, but you can just kind of see the resemblance there, and the sizing and all of that. So yeah, he's actually got the same thing going on with the tail here, where he's got the shorter tails, and they sort of separate a bit lower down compared to the Heisei style figure there, so that's pretty cool. And just for fun, I'm just going to bring in the 2019 Bandai vinyl of King Ghidorah, just to kind of show you guys the sizing. Now, this guy's pretty much the same size as the actual Heisei King Ghidorah, although his main body is shaped very differently. He does tend to sort of slouch down and forward a little bit more, if you can see that there, compared to this guy, which generally sort of has more of a slightly more forward upright pose, although you can also slouch him down if you so wish. So here we go. Let's take a good look at these close-up details of this figure. So you can see there's nice faces, very much the Heisei Ghidorah's faces. I really like the Heisei Ghidorah's design. Personally, I'm a bit more of a Showa fan myself when it comes to King Ghidorah, but I do really love these sort of mean expressions we get on his faces. You can see the nice paintwork they did do for the mouths here. Really nice sort of deep burgundy color, and the sculpt is nice and crisp, very similar to the original ones. There's a little comparison you guys can see between the original Ghidorah and this bootleg one in terms of his faces. Not all that much different, though. In all honesty, the sculpt looks pretty much just as sharp and is really well done. So aside from these horns being a little bit bent when it came out of the box, no real complaints there. The mouths articulate probably just as well as the original one, and yeah, I like the paint job more. So you can see there the different type of plating on the neck there. The more rougher looking, sort of wider ones on the Heisei ones, and the more smoother ones that we get on this new figure here. Let's take a look at the body. What's really cool is you can see there's some little parts here, like this little divot here, and there's another one here, which kind of help make this thing look like it's an actual suit. You know, how, you know, the crinkles in the original suit and all that sort of stuff. So that looks really cool. The scaling and the detailing all over the body is really nice. Like, it completely blends with the original scaling on the parts from the Heisei figure, and it looks just as good as any other MonsterArts that I've seen. So going down, you can see the different slightly different legs and feet. Now you can see the claws on this one. They from the top they look pretty good, but they do seem a little bit more rounded and sort of plain, especially if we look underneath his feet here, and we get this sort of really flat looking piece of plastic under his feet, which is that telltale sign that this one's not an authentic figure. Now here, in the joints between these bits of the tail, you can actually see that lighter gold color starting to bleed through that I was talking about. So right there is that kind of lighter gold. And, you know, we got these shorter tails, beautifully textured. Like, this feels really rough. And just in general, this figure is actually pretty heavy. His main body feels kind of pretty solid. And now we have this tail piece, which I don't think are accurate to the Showa King Ghidorah, but they look really seamless with this tail here, so I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe these are accurate, but they just look sort of like a minusculely tight, slightly shrunken version of the one that is on the normal Heisei version. So that's kind of interesting, and you can kind of get a good sense of these things bending. There's no like plating or anything under the tails, kind of like we have on the necks. It's just all scaling all the way around. So you guys can kind of see that. On the back of this figure, that's what the back looks like. Again, beautifully done with the scales, and you can see these joints here and how they function. So that gives you guys a good idea. And the beautiful, beautiful wings on this thing. So again, they look just like an actual real sort of material stretched between these wings. The sculpt is really done beautifully to make these look as authentic as possible to an actual, you know, Ghidorah wing, which is so cool. And on the backs of the necks, you can see the more triangle-like little spines running down them, and that beautiful gold color that they have all over this thing. So there we go. That gives you guys a nice little close-up look at this little bootleg figure, and just to kind of give you guys an idea of how crisp and nice the detail work really is. And it really surprises me for a figure of this price range, and the fact that it's not an actual, you know, MonsterArts figure, how well they actually made it. So I'm definitely convinced this thing was made using actual, you know, bits of mold, pieces of mold, molds that they use for, you know, real MonsterArts figures. So very nice, very cool. While I have this camera in on this sort of macro level so that you can kind of see things really close up, I want to start talking about the effect parts that come with this thing. So in particular, it does come with effect parts. That's really a cool thing. And we get this little jet, or the spaceship, the mini one from the film. So if you guys aren't aware, in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the 90s one, there is this sort of little time-traveling spaceship. There's like a big mothership, but this is like the small version that comes out of it. And they use this to travel back in time and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, here's a version of that that you can get in scale with this figure, which is really cool. The original one I think is painted white. This one's like a gray and black color. The detailing's not as great as it could be, but you know, it's just a nice little addition to this figure, because they really didn't have to include this at all, and people would still probably buy this. So here we go. Here's all the stuff that we get with our King Ghidorah figure, and it's a lot of stuff. So this is basically just copies or versions of the exact same stuff that you would get with the actual King Ghidorah special color version figure, which is really neat because he comes with this flight stand. Really nice solid feeling stand, although I may need a screwdriver just to tighten it. I actually haven't used it yet just because I don't really like the idea of putting a big ass delicate King Ghidorah figure on a little plastic stand to have him flying, because he looks just as great standing and I don't have to, you know, worry about him dying every day. So I haven't used that yet, but we could give it a quick shot now, see how it works. Because this body, the body sculpt on this thing is slightly different to the original one. His contours may not like fit in perfectly with the detailing on the stand, but you know, let's give it a go. Okay, so you know, he's not falling, which is good. Actually looks really cool. So there, you have a flying King Ghidorah figure, and I'm not going to leave him there because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. But, you know, it does actually look really awesome on this thing. Okay, so there's a flight stand. You know, it did come in two pieces where you had to click this thing on, which is a bit tedious, and you had to, like three pieces actually, you had to click this arm into the body, which it does feel really solid. It was all dusty when it arrived too, so I don't know, maybe it's like an official MonsterArts one that was just like in storage in a back room and they kind of like stole it or something, because this thing was all dusty on the top. But it does have all the Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah and all that Toho licensing stuff on the top there, so you can read that. I think it says it's from 2015. So that's pretty interesting. So, you know, flight stand. It's just crazy because they did not have to include this stuff, but yet it is here. So I'll put that to the side, and we'll talk about these things, which are probably going to be some people's favorite part of this figure, and that is the beams. So we get this crazy contraption, which is this Tamashii stand, or a copy of a Tamashii stand, but probably a copy. These little arms don't look probably as nice as the actual Tamashii ones. The plastic seems a tiny bit more cloudy. Who knows? But yeah, we pop these in, and these also came in little pieces, but I've assembled it so they have these extra arms and these like little clip bits at the top, and you get three King Ghidorah beams. Now I'm super happy that I got these because the original King Ghidorah that I have back here, I got that one second hand, so it did not come with any of the accessories, so it didn't come with his original beams. Now unfortunately these ones are the colored beams, so we get a blue one there at the top, and we get this more sort of almost like a slightly orangey red, more pinkish type of yellowy beam in the middle, and then we just get the yellow one at the bottom there. All of these have the same sort of cool gravity beam, electricity, lightning sort of sculpt, and they do look really, really cool and are really nicely made, so really like these. And the idea is that you clip them into these little clippies here, and then this thing has to, you know, hold them up, and you adjust them to go into King Ghidorah's mouth. Now I'm not exactly sure which part of these beams fit into these clips really well, because for the most part they feel kind of loose in here, but you can, you know, find ways of making them fit if you mess around with them, because these little clips here are actually kind of wide, so you've got to find the nice wide part of these effect pieces to stick into it. And, you know, it's a little fiddly, but, you know, you guys know how beams work and all of that, so you guys can totally just play around with this and make it work. But, you know, the basic idea is you get the beam in here, you open this guy's mouth up, and you stick it in like that, and then he's doing his happy lightning attack. And that looks really cool, even with the blue beam, which is really nice. And these beams would be perfect for your, what's it called, Mecha King Ghidorah figure, if you guys have one of those. I really, really want a MonsterArts Mecha King Ghidorah, but I don't have one, and I can't afford one or anything, unless they do a re-release, perhaps. But, yeah, because That one, the robotic head, had like a different color beam. I'm pretty sure it also had like a blue beam. So these ones could pass off just as both yellow for the side heads and then the blue one for the robotic head in the middle. It would look great. But yeah, so he does come with this whole stand arrangement, beams, and this little tiny jet, which doesn't have a stand, but perhaps if you take this off, because it does have a little divot, perhaps the little jet, time-traveling craft you could put in here. Would that work? There's a little divot in here. But, yeah, I mean, honestly, the stand is much more distracting than the little thing here, because it's like this big thick piece of clear plastic and then just this little tiny thing on the end. But you could, in theory, use this to have that flying around, and then you could use the other two for his other beams and whatnot. But, you know, just cool to get effect parts like this, because the more effects parts you have, always the better. Even if you don't intend on using them, you could always find uses for them in the future and all that sort of stuff. So that is so awesome. Just a really cool surprise. It's like, they went all out with this thing to make it as, complete as it could be. Which is really bizarre again, because they have all these effect parts from the actual special color version figure, but the body and, the necks and the tails and all of that and the legs is just not from this figure. Like, I don't know where this came from. I'm just completely honestly baffled as to, like, where these Showa parts came from. Like, is there a Showa Ghidorah in the works? Because, like, there has been images of one circling around online, although people have said that it is a customization, and some have said that it's a bootleg. And one of my theories is that it might be a customization of a bootleg, but seeing this thing, it's probably more likely that it's just a leaked prototype of the actual Showa King Ghidorah that we may be getting from MonsterArts in the future. Bluefin, the distributor for MonsterArts figures in the US, have sort of, people have asked them about it, and they've kind of winked at maybe it's happening. Like, they haven't outright said it, but they did sort of imply that, yeah, there will be a Showa Ghidorah coming in the future. So I feel kind of really lucky to, in that case, to have like a sneak preview and to be able to really touch the damn thing itself before it is even, properly announced. So that is so cool. Yeah, that's almost it for this review. I'm going to cut to the size comparison now so you guys can get a good look at how big this figure is, because for MonsterArts, just like the previous Ghidorah, this is a big figure. I mean, compared to the 2019 King Ghidorah figure, this thing is tiny, but compared to like every other Godzilla in this line, this thing's big and really affordable because of that. So yeah, let's cut to the size comparison and then we'll conclude. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed that little size comparison there. You saw this guy's a nice chunky boy, basically the same size as the previous, the actual King Ghidorah Heisei figure and all of that. But yeah, overall, I'm really surprised. I'm gonna give this guy a really solid recommend. Like, this is a quality figure for, especially for the price. Like I said, I got this one for about 80 Australian dollars, which is, for a MonsterArts, it's like the cheapest that you could ever get a MonsterArts. Like, I don't think I've gotten a MonsterArts for this price, like, ever. It's usually closer to the $100 range in Australian dollars. Because you Americans are probably hearing 80 $80, that's so expensive. But for you guys, it's probably closer to like $50 or $60, I'm guessing. But I have seen this guy, like, this was obviously I bought the cheapest one that I could. I have seen this guy on other sites, and most of the time he does go for closer to like $120. There's usually, like, on eBay, you can make an offer for him, so maybe you can reduce that price significantly. Even for $120, I would definitely have gone for this figure. It is, you know, genuinely a really quality figure, and just such a cool novelty to, you know, get all these new sculpted bits and sort of feel what this potential Showa Ghidorahs would be like, you know, coming up in the future. Not to mention, if you actually want to customize this thing to make it into a Showa King Ghidorah figure, you literally can't get a better platform to do that. And you just get so much value for your money with this thing. Like, you get a full figure which is pretty much of MonsterArts quality, like, honestly. Fully articulated, really good work with the ball joints. Now, you may have minor issues here and there, but all of mine have been resolved simply by blasting this thing with a hairdryer, really. And yeah, you get all these cool accessories, which they really didn't need to include in this thing, but they went out of their way, and they did. Now, some people's ones actually come with their own sort of custom box that goes with this thing, which is like a bootleg version of the special color version figures box, which is really funny. So that's another little cool novelty that you may be lucky enough to get with this thing. But mine just came, you know, wrapped in a small dingy box, which looked really poorly treated, but luckily everything in it was perfectly fine. So yeah, again, the paintwork on this is lovely. It stands out in my collection, and I'm actually liking this figure more than I like my original my original release, more accurate Heisei Ghidorah. And, you know, I love both of these things, but yeah, this is a really impressive figure for the price, and I'm actually gonna give it a really good recommending for anyone who isn't afraid of bootleg figures and wants to give this a go, because I know the real deal of these sort of MonsterArts King Ghidorah figures are insanely expensive. They're some of the most expensive figures in the entire line, especially if you know, want to get it in a really good condition, all that stuff. It's really hard to find. So just, you know, if you have any doubts, I'd say go for it. You've really got nothing to lose with this thing. Again, I'm just talking about my particular one that I got here. Like, who knows how the quality control on these things will be. But all I can really say is that my one is so good, and I'm hoping that if you guys go for it, yours one will be too. So yeah, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz, or don't. It's a free world. You can do whatever you want. It would be nice. So yeah, may all your vinyl be radiated vinyl. Over and out.